Well, I want to say welcome to everybody in the spiritual activism track. So glad that you chose this track, and I'm going to be the one shepherding us through these 3 sessions. And Judy's here to help us with our first session, The Origins of Belief and Ideology. Spiritual activism, I think, could be defined in so many different ways. And so we're curious, and I'll be curious throughout these 3 sessions to see both how you define it now and how that may shift as we go through this program together. Mm-hmm. Because I'm pretty open myself to seeing new things. I had a lot of ideas about activism right after the election. And many people did on both sides. And I noticed that they're shifting according to what I see in my wisdom changing. As I see what's happening and reactions and what's effective and what's not. So that's going to be our focus, is really on our own wisdom. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's always new. So that's what's exciting to me about being with you for these 2 days, is what will your wisdom bring up for me to see and learn about as well, or for Judy, or for some of the other speakers and participants. So I'll introduce myself a little bit. I think most of you know me pretty well already, or some of you do. Some of you know me very well, and some don't, not at all. And I'll try to introduce Judy a little bit. But my name is Ami Chen Mills-Naim. The man that Jamie was talking about, Roger Mills, this morning, was my father. And so I was kind of in the back seat watching him do all kinds of work around the 3 principles in very low income, very distressed communities in Florida, in the Bronx, in California, and achieve these very remarkable results. In fact, I didn't believe a lot of what he would say to me because it just didn't sound real. Even when he said he was on the Today Show, I was in college when he was on the Today Show, I don't know if I ever believed it.
I watched it. He was on.
He was on. And after we started a nonprofit together, I found a tape, Today Show. Yeah. And I put it in. I thought, holy moly, that was really something.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't involved. I was in journalism and doing different things with my life. I wasn't touched by those principles as I would be later on. So, but I got to watch from the back seat, got to observe. And as I say, I was in journalism for some time. I suffered through a period of depression in my 20s, and that really sparked me to figure out what is going on, that people suffer so much. Mm-hmm. And so when I came out of that as a journalist, I did some research into the biochemistry of depression and the new medications that were coming out. Is this all brain chemistry? I wanted to know. What about the human spirit? Because for me, the human spirit is what healed me. And it was when I was writing that article about depression that I started to interview people like Mark Howard and some of my father's colleagues in the mental health fields. And I just got struck by, this is so logical, this is it. This is what I experienced in my depression and how I came out of it, and what they're saying explains that. So then I got involved. I worked for Santa Clara County for many years, teaching in the jails, teaching in juvenile hall, the 3 principles, teaching county employees. It was about 6 years. And then I co-founded the Center for Sustainable Change. I did that for about 5 years with my father, maybe longer. He passed away in 2010. Sydney Banks passed in 2009. And I eventually handed the reins of the center over to Dave Nichols, who's here. So I have a lot of background in community work. We did a lot of work at the center throughout the country in also very low income communities and also hospital systems and schools. And so I've seen the impacts of teaching about thought in all these different systems. And we had the same kinds of outcomes in North Carolina that Dad did in Modelo in South Dade County, Florida. And a lot of people don't know that. And I like to share that because Dad was pretty sick at that time. He wasn't there very often. And it was Dave and Lloyd Fields and Cynthia just going in and really loving people in the community. I think that's maybe the word I haven't heard yet is love.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that that word will infuse these, or at least the feeling behind that word will infuse these conversations that we have over the next few sessions together. So that's me, and now I have my own little practice, Ami Chen Coaching and Education. I do that, and I come and help out when I can at things like this, and conferences, and so on and so forth. I have a couple books, The Spark Inside, State of Mind in the Classroom, which my father co-authored. And that book, Realizing Mental Health, that Jamie mentioned, is not available it's not in print anymore, but I have it, and I've got it scanned, and I'm planning on re-releasing it.
Oh, wonderful.
With some edits.
Yay!
Yes. So that hopefully will be out. When I talk about books, it's always a little bit, maybe a year. And this is Judy Sedgman. I have the honor to be sitting here with Judy, and she's been around for a long, long time in the principals. I think I first met her, she was maybe interning first and then working at Pransky and Associates.
Yeah, right.
She went off to West Virginia University and started the Sydney Banks Institute for Innate Mental Health, WVU, went through a lot there, tremendous amount with Dr. Bill Pettit, a psychiatrist. She's in Bradenton now. She's working with the Center for Sustainable Change. And she also has her own organization called Three Principles Living.
Right.
And she was very close with Sid Banks when he was alive. And she's been a mentor to me. Wonderful woman, Judy Sedgman.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have to say a few things about Amy because Amy's dad was one of my colleagues and good friends, and I'll tell you a cute little thing that we did together that was instructive about what we're talking about. But so I've known Amy longer than she remembers me knowing her probably, but when she was in journalism, her dad was very proud, and he would send his friends, her articles. Say, look at what Amy wrote. She had this big article, and I thought, and I had been a journalist in my past, and I was so in awe because she was so good. And I thought, well, she's not going to go into the principles. At least she's going to really make a difference in journalism, So, because at that time, all of us had the vision that our kids would carry on, but now other people's kids are carrying on. It works out great, and some of our kids are. But so when Amy came into the center and started work, well, it wasn't the center then, but started working with her dad, everybody was so thrilled because she's such a beautiful spirit. And part of it she brings from the same thing that made her a wonderful journalist is that she really listens to people. She hears what they're saying to her, and she reports it back accurately. And, in life, when we work with clients, that's the deal. You look at people and you listen to them. And then you hear what they're telling you, and it's their thought, and you're seeing it through your thought. But when you're really listening, you're listening to the humanity behind the thought. And when you pick up that humanity behind the thought, and you write down what the people said, it carries that. It's not just dry words on a page. So I'm a big fan of Amy and have been for a number of years, but this is the very first time we've ever had a chance to work together. But I worked with Roger a lot over the years, and the funniest thing that we ever did together, and the reason why I want to say this is because Roger was in New York working with a housing area known as Banana Kelly. I don't know if it's even still there, but it was in the Bronx, and he was working with a lot of people who lived in this really difficult housing project, and just having a wonderful time. And I went to New York to work with a corporation, a very high-end consulting company. But I knew Roger was there, so I called Roger. I tracked him down, and this was before cell phones, actually. It was a long time ago. But, I called Clytie, and Clytie said, oh, this is how you reach Roger, and I reached Roger. And he said, let's get our groups together. Wouldn't that be fun? And I said, yeah, you know. So we got a room at Fordham University, and I didn't tell my group that they were going to be with another group, and Roger didn't, we wanted them to come, you know, for sure. So, and my daughter at that time was in college in New York, so she came to register people when they came in, you know, and there was this really bizarre kind of hallway encounters, you know, with people. Like I had the Gucci loafer crowd, and then Roger had the housing crowd, and they're all kind of like, what, you know, and it was mutual. I mean, so they come in, and on the first morning of the training, and what it was really just kind of a facilitation, but on the first morning, so like, you know, one of the groups was over here, and the other group was over here, and there was a you know, aisle up the middle of the hall that we were in, and there's kind of like this going on, you know, like, okay. And so Roger and I, we thought, oh, it's no big deal. It's, you know, it's only the first morning, and we're talking, but you know, it was, I think we were both getting a little bit insecure because we really wanted people to have a good time. And we felt like there was unexpressed tension in the room, and we weren't quite getting to it yet. And finally, one of Roger's people, a beautiful woman, stood up from the back of the room, and she said, Dr. Mills, Miss Dutchman, you all sit down a minute. So we sat down, because she was one of those women, y'all know those people, when they tell you to sit down, you go, okay, yeah. So she was somebody's mama, for sure. And she gets up there, and she stands in the front of the room, and I gotta stand up to do this. So she says, now listen, folks, and y'all listen too, she says to my group. She says, here's what it's all about. Sometimes you're in your right mind, sometimes you're not. This is better. And that was it. Everybody started laughing. They had a wonderful time. And then when we came back from lunch, people were just sitting all over the place and making friends. And actually, there were several people that got employed during that training. Yeah, because the people that I had brought were saying, like, man, these people are really great. I'm going to hire some of these folks. So it worked out just to be a wonderful thing. But I'll never forget that, because Roger, and that was our greatest idea ever. And the lady saved us. And that's how it always is, you know, the wisdom, you never know where the wisdom's going to pop up, you know, and hers saved the day. So, yeah.
So let's just hear from you. We've got a lot of people in the room, so what I'd like to do to start with, and if we had our way, we'd be down on the floor.
Yes.
But because we have cameras and people who are virtually attending this session, we need to be up here with the mics. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure how to bridge this gap so well.
You got to pretend it isn't here.
Yes. And what I'd like to do is at least have everyone say their name and where they're from. Mm-hmm. And then as we get into the conversation, you know, we'll hear more from you. We'll hear more from each other. So let's at least get that introduction going. Just name and where you're from.
I'm John Countryman. I live in Richmond, Virginia now.
Doug Maycomb, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Dave Nichols, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Freddy Jackson, I live here in Charlottesville, Virginia.
David Wetmore, Columbus, Ohio.
Daniel Martinez, I'm living in Northern Virginia.
Nate Moore, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Wow, there's a lot of people from Charlotte.
Colin Tassler, Pensacola, Florida.
Yay!
Ryan Hulbert, Boise, Idaho.
Ali and Naim, Santa Cruz, California.
Whoa, whoa.
Sharon Strimling, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts.
Terry Alamo, Canandaigua, New York.
Jen Lucas, Charlottesville, Virginia.
Dajohn White, Chicago.
Lindsay Schwartz, Chicago, Illinois.
Haitham Atauna, Palestine.
Wow.
Mahima from Nepal.
I'm Srijana, originally from Nepal, living in Charlottesville for the past 1 year.
Oh, wow.
Pam Gibson, Charlottesville, Virginia.
Jeannie Nichols, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Gail Hunger, Charlottesville, Virginia.
Callie Gaston, Charlottesville.
Lisa Eller, Charlottesville.
Dawn Shimke, Charlottesville.
One more. In the back.
Yeah, way in the back.
Kathy Johnson, Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.
All right, thank you, John.
So how many people have never heard the principles before today? Do we have any new folks? One person. Okay. What's that? I researched them last night. You researched them,
there you
so
go.
you got a little
You're an expert.
background. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So that's something we might cover again.
Yeah.
Even if there's just one new person, it never
Yeah.
hurts to hear the principles again, because we're always in thought. And, you know, sometimes I myself, believe it or not, can be in negative thinking.
Me too.
And to hear them again for me is a reminder.
Yeah.
And also about my beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, this election has challenged a lot of my beliefs. You know, I really think this, and then I'm hearing this other side really thinks something very different. So it's sort of been like the pinprick. Okay, wait a second. What do I really believe? Is it true? So we might cover them again, but our topic is the origin of belief and ideology, which I think actually lends itself to going back to the principles.
Absolutely.
But I thought to kind of, you've been talked at a lot, so I'm just wondering if we could throw that out in terms of a question. What do you see as the origin of people's beliefs and ideologies? How is it, if there's one thing we can agree on, in this, at least in this country right now, and possibly the world, is that we have very different beliefs and ideologies. And that those beliefs and ideologies are we're so passionate about them, we're so wedded to them, they're so much a part of our identity as human beings, that we're willing to kill for them. And so I'm just wondering, do you think it'd be good to throw it out?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
right.
did it now.
I think I already said it. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
It'd be
it's
a
great.
riot if I
I'm
did
totally
it.
with you.
And Jen wanted me to remind you, if you do have something to say, okay, you're going to need to have the microphone.
Is that on?
And it needs to be on, yeah.
That's a great voice.
Is it on? Okay.
Yeah. He's a theater guy. He could have.
Yeah, you're going to. Yeah, that's right.
You
We
could've
may be
believed
able
it.
to hear you in here, but this is actually for the people on the virtual track and also for the recording of this,
Yeah.
so that we can hear you speak. So if you have something to say, make sure I get to you with the microphone. Okay.
So what are your reflections on the origins of belief and ideology? If you think about where does that come from for each human being? And, you know, how is there something about that that's meaningful to you, you know, in terms of being here and what your questions are? And I think Judy and I will just take in what you have to say and
Yeah. Let's see where it takes us.
The other day I was talking with a friend of mine at work about my brother, when we were little kids, was given a Nazi cross as a gift from a girl that had a crush on him. And we're Latin American and we have Jewish blood in our background. And we were talking about the irony of that. And it was the conversation more about how innocent kids are when they grow up in a certain environment and they are taught by their parents or their teachers or their community to believe a certain way, and they don't have any other reference point to think of it as good or bad, that they just grow up with that idea. So this little girl is giving a Nazi cross to my brother as a gift of appreciation and of love.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that that's the origin of belief and ideology.
Yeah. She believed that it was a beautiful gift. Mm-hmm.
Hi, so for myself, and I heard you speaking with it too just now, Amy, I think for all of us, my personal belief that at some point in our lives, we're always searching for a truth outside of ourselves. So I do believe that that's the origin for all of us, is that there's something magnificent to life. There's something of deeper meaning and purpose. So I believe that that's where it all starts. That's the source, and from that, people build off their beliefs and their identity with that.
So they're looking for something, and then they start to grab onto maybe concepts and ideas that are around them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
First of all, I wanted to say this is a really cool question, because I haven't thought about this before in the way that you're asking it. And what's come to mind is that I remember growing up paying a lot of attention to what my mom thought was important, but I also can recall being aware that there were differences of opinion. So what Daniel mentioned about the assumptions and sort of the soup that you're in, and assuming that the Nazi cross was something positive or giving a gift, and there's that point where maybe you don't know about the different opinions. I do remember that there were different opinions, but my mom was really important to me. And so I think that there's something about my ideology and belief that comes from what I think about who I'm hearing things from. Mm-hmm. And so the level of importance I would assign to, I'm going to listen to you because I love you, and so that makes sense that I would listen closely, and that would be what I would follow and see as important.
At the same time, I was learning the 3 principles from Bill Pettit in the state hospital in Iowa 25 years ago. I became familiar with a psychiatrist, Hector Sabelli, in Chicago, and he had quite a complicated theory, but something that I think is really sound is that he said that the biopsychosocial approach is not a correct wording, that it should be biosocial psychological. And the reason he played such a emphasis on it was that he said there's a biological priority. We have to eat, we have to sleep, and so forth. And then the social comes next, similar to the last comment of that influence of our parents and so forth. But he said there's a biological priority, but a psychological supremacy, that there's something inside of us urging us to grow and become more psychologically aware.
Anyone else? Sharon.
Everything that people are saying makes sense to me, and there also feels to me like there's, no matter how much I loved somebody, I might still feel differently about something. And it feels like beyond me, like something that sometimes comes through me that maybe is supposed to play out through me. I mean, I don't know how it works, but you know, that makes sense to me, and that feels like some kind of imperative in my life. You know, so it's like it feels like there's a piece of it that I can sort of work through, or culturally, or what makes sense to me, and then there's another piece that's kind of working itself through me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
For me, when I look back at the beliefs I've held over the years, I feel like it starts as a thought, but then it becomes very important to me because it seems to be true to me. So in different phases of your life, different things seem to be true to you. So when I was, surrounded by it, it seemed very true. And when I was exposed to different beliefs, it seemed less possible that that was the only answer. So starting with the thought, but then how true it seems to me in the moment seems to shift it from a thought to an ideology.
I definitely think that the origins of belief come from family, mom, those influences. But there's some other things that comes with that, like compassion, respect, that you learn as well. So it's sort of, instead of being so grounded and totally identifying with that belief, I was able to understand or practice to understand others and where they're coming from. Even if I messed it up, I was practicing it, So I definitely think it's all learned, but there's a lot more learning going on as well that complements that and kind of opens you up to humanity. So.
I always believed that we come into this world with a lot of wisdom, that like children who get up to walk and fall down, and they just get up again, and that gets covered up by things we're surrounded by. I grew up with a very angry father, and so as a teenager, it's like, wait, we're supposed to be Christian. Why are you yelling? Why do you hate the Vietnamese? You don't even know these people. They're people just like we are. How could you possibly categorize them as, the names they got called at the dinner table? So, definitely as we grow, we get to think for ourselves as well, and we start to question. And agree with Sharon that many times in my life, and I have no idea why the 3 clubs came up this morning, just to put that out there. Wisdom comes through me.
Yeah.
And it's not of me. And for the longest time, I felt myself as a physical being searching for some spiritual meaning. And I really have come to see that we are all spiritual beings having a physical experience, which has oftentimes been very difficult for me to contend with. It's like, I don't want to do this physical thing anymore. Like there's part of me that's just like, I had a long period of depression, or what was labeled depression, and was on medication, and finally felt like the medication was making me so flat. I'm not having happy or sad thoughts. I'm just like, and weaned myself off the medication, and then came to find the principles, and just am so grateful to understand. And my husband will say to me, it seems like you're depressed. And I said, I'm having some depressed thoughts, yes, and they'll go away. They'll come and they'll go. And so I don't have to, I think we are so drawn to labeling things, which is sort of, we label our beliefs, we label everything. And
Republicans, Democrats, left, right.
Right, exactly. Instead of seeing that we're all
just doing
the best we can here in form.
That's lovely.
Anyone else? Do you want to say anything?
She has a hand up. Yeah, I will. Yeah.
I've been really fascinated, really since my vision sort of opened up after the election, about how people's minds change, and watching a lot of stories about like a young woman who was part of the Westboro Baptist Church and was brought up completely involved in negativism around people of color, and then someone who was brought up in a family that was Nazis, and their personal stories of how their minds changed, and their whole experience of how they wanted to be in the world and how they wanted to act in the world changed. And that just amazes me, but it also makes total sense that your mind can change.
Yeah.
And what you're brought up with is totally able to shift when you are able to see that that's possible. And each, all these stories have sort of poignant moments where they are trying to figure out how that change happened. But what's great about the principles for me is that it sort of explains that that's possible.
that there's something deeper than beliefs and ideologies. There's something that can wake up in someone that is about our connectedness. That to me is not a belief or an ideology, it's just a fact. And that's different. So I love that.
To add on to that, when we think about the whole situation of all this negative talk about what happened here and what's happening around the country, in another sense, it's another way to revisit how you think about these things, because in some sense you maybe thought you had it figured out, how you thought about it. And I've realized different issues of race and gender, and it's just, I realize it's a different place to look at it from now. Even when I've read things a long time ago, I thought, I know what I believe here, but I've appreciated, not that it's happened, but when people say it's so horrible, people think Charlottesville's horrible now, and I don't really see that way. I just think that things happen in different places. But it really has been an opportunity to look from a different lens at what I'm thinking still.
That's wonderful that you're willing to question your own thinking. Because if we're not willing to,
why would we expect anyone else to?
Yeah, this is it, ground zero in this room.
So I had my first encounter with the difference between beliefs and believing when I was a small child. And when I was little, I was being raised Catholic, and there were a lot of rules, and the nuns were really strict about them. And one of them was you always ate fish on Fridays. And when I was little, I did not like fish. And I complained every Friday, but I was told if I didn't eat fish on Fridays, I was going to hell. And so, it's worth it. Just get over it and eat your fish because you don't want to go to hell. And, I was so little that hell seemed pretty far away and the fish was right there. But anyway.
Stinking up the place.
Yeah. So, but they changed the rule. You're all too young to know this, but some of us maybe. But the Pope just announced one time, okay, we don't have to eat fish on Fridays anymore. And I was like, what? I've been eating fish for years, at least 3, and since I was little, and now this guy, like, who is he to say that God doesn't want us, and why, now what's going to happen to all of us who didn't eat fish? Now so people aren't going to hell? What's the deal here? And I was really upset. I mean, I was crying. I was really having a tantrum about it, and my dad comes up to me. And my dad, who I adored, he was a very, very wise person. But anyway, my dad sat me down and he said, every religion has rules. And sometimes they're pretty darn stupid. Because they weren't made up by God. They were made up by men thinking about what God meant. And your role in life is to see it your own way, to figure out what God meant for you, and live your best life. And don't pay attention to all this surface stuff, because it's always going to change. People change their mind about stuff that they think, but there are certain things that never change. And he explained to me that reverence was more important than whether you ate fish or didn't eat fish. And, I was too little to really grasp how deep that was. But it was very comforting because it felt deep, and sometimes your parents say things to you when you're little, and even though you don't get it, you feel it. But all my life, I remember that story every time something would come up and people would go, what? I can't believe anybody would say, and I was thinking, well, it's the fish again, the same old thing. Because deeper than the fish was the desire to do the right thing. When you look deeper, every time you look at a surface rule or a surface issue and you look deeper, you can get to common ground. because the common ground is we all just want to have a decent life and hope that other people are fine and nobody hurts anybody. But we mess it up all the time, you know, with these things that we think.
So I'm going to take a little stab at trying to connect the principles with this idea of beliefs and ideology and some of the things that you guys have said. And so hopefully for the new people, this will help reveal the principles a bit more, and for all of us, myself included. So Sydney Banks was the discoverer of the principles, although he'd say they discovered me. And he saw them as very important to take the field of psychology, the field of social work, the field of mental health, and actually if you look at politics or anything else, you know, there's so many differences. What could possibly help us unify and see things as universal or common to us? And honestly, Sid used to also say the truth is everywhere in a different disguise.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like we're here saying, oh, look, we're the first ones to ever say this. That's not so. It's been being said for eons, since humans could probably speak and think, right? It's just this particular formulation, so simple. And I think that's the gift that Sid brought to the world, was the simplicity of these principles that actually cut through. You know, I think Jamie was talking about different religions. He speaks to people of different religions and no religion. And I've done that too, quite a bit.
Me too.
And so what words could be used to help us all understand what's going on without getting caught up in our beliefs and ideologies? So these were the words that Sid said would be useful. And we found them to be very useful in the schools and social, you know, government systems and so on. So mind is the energy and intelligence of all life, whether in form or formless. Some people say God, some people have an image of God in their minds, and other people just say, I know people who say nature. That's the word they use. They don't say God, they say nature. Life. Sometimes I like that word, life. Here it is. It's unbelievable. When you're present to life, you can't even believe your own body is operating at the level it's operating right in this moment. The heart is beating, the liver's working. I mean, it would take you years to even in med school to figure out what's going on. And yet it's happening. It's a miracle when you have that moment of appreciation. So that's what mind is, this intelligence of life that we're not in charge of. And yet it's a part of us. It's part of our bodies, it's a part of our minds, it's a part of our hearts. We can't separate from it because it's life itself. And then consciousness is our capacity to be aware of this life. It's the same word as awareness. And Sid used to say that. It's just awareness. Keep it simple. Mm-hmm. We are aware of life. We have the gift. If we didn't have consciousness, if we didn't have awareness, we wouldn't be aware of anything. There'd be no form. There'd be no substance. There'd be no life. There wouldn't be these 10,000 things that we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. And then thought, some people call this free will. We have the capacity to take this energy of creativity that we're given as a gift of life and create all kinds of stuff. You know, our pottery, our paintings, our music, our fine arts, our buildings, our architecture, and also our self-concept, our self-image, our bringing up the past all the time, our beliefs and our ideologies. You know, me, our life story, it's all about me. And we live in these bubbles or these worlds of our own creation via thought. And in fact, even right now, as we're looking around, we're in this room, we're having thoughts about I don't like the color of this tablecloth, which I don't.
I didn't notice it.
That's all right. Yeah. Brown, it's not my favorite. But someone else might love brown. And maybe they had, a lot of brown in their home growing up. And so they love brown. And I have this thing about brown because I think it's just too dark for a room or whatever. So we're actually having a different reaction to this tablecloth. Each one of us, as I pointed out, are flowers. Someone's maybe allergic. So they're having, oh, flowers. And other people are like, oh, it's so nice.
Yeah.
So thought is this universal capacity we have to constantly be creating our experience of life. And in my mind, that's where our fixed, what we see as fixed, they're not fixed, our ideologies and belief systems come from. And they can be religious or political or about our identities, our cultures, and they can also be very personal, ideologies. Like, I used to think that if someone needed to look you in the eye when you were talking to them, and that was respectful and that was listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I got married, I had a family, had kids. And I'd be like, are you listening to me? Are you listening to me? And I get frustrated because I thought, well, if my kids or my husband is not looking me in the eye, then they're not listening to me and it's not respectful, and I get upset. And I'm not saying it's not good to look, it's nice to look someone in the eye when they're talking to you. It does show something, right? It's nice. But I realized I was getting in my way because people were listening to me. They were just distracted in the moment, perhaps, or they were actually looking down and listening. But I was taking it as an offense, if that makes sense. And it was upsetting me. And so that's when thought becomes a disservice to us. And again, I'm not saying you couldn't say, I'd love it if you could, put your phone down or just look me in the eye. But when it becomes stressful, then we need to go inside and say, wait a second, am I right that this is true, that no one's listening if they're not looking me in the eye? What about when I'm driving and my daughter's talking to me or someone's talking to me and I can't look them in the eye at all? That would be dangerous. Am I listening?
Sure.
Right? So in terms of what you all have said so far, and I really am hoping to open this up because I'd also love to hear about just any other issues you may have about social activism, spiritual activism, why you're here in this track, that's open too. But when something becomes fixed, it becomes a problem. And there's a difference between a fixed thought, people should look me in the eye, or people should be a certain religion, or people should be a certain political party, or they should agree with me, and wisdom, which I don't think we've spoken about much, but that's something that is thinking that is fresh. Jamie talked about new thinking. And so what happens is we get caught up in these old thoughts that become like a crust on our minds. And we keep repeating, that's what I believe, that's what I believe, that's right. But when it starts to become suffering, when we start to see that it's creating problems, as it is in this world, everywhere, then it's time to start to break through that crust. And what's underneath, it's like lava. When lava gets a crust, it hardens into, it can turn into rock, solid rock. But when it's fresh and alive, a crust may be forming, but there's this red hot lava that's coming out from the volcano, and it's moving and it's flowing and it's powerful. It's alive. And that's wisdom. That's insight. That's mind. Waking us up, hey, you know what? There's more to life than your belief system and your ideology. And when we can touch that, then there's hope for moving forward in our communities, whether we're working just on a small scale in communities or whether we're going to the White House, walking the halls of Congress, and respecting that the other person has that capacity too, to break through their belief and ideology. Because if we don't have that respect for the wisdom in the other, then why are we even talking to them? What are we doing? What's the point? And that's what I saw in, as a child in Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, is their fundamental premise was that the people on the opposing side, or the people who were doing wrong, 100% had the capacity to see through that. And that it was our recognition of that capacity that would make the difference, if that makes sense. We all are connected to mind. And that's our homing device in a way. It's like, well, that's where we want to go, because it feels good to be in a state of love and connectedness. That's the best feeling there is. So, and I'll just tell a brief story, and then I'll give it to Judy and you all. But I was on the plane I'm an activist, okay? I mean, I come from an activist background, and I'm not going to apologize for that.
Good.
So that activism reawoke in me after the election. I understand there may be people of different political persuasions here, and so let's have a talk, right? Because we can talk now that we know the principles. I get on the plane. My daughter and I ran to get to our second flight to get to Richmond from Minneapolis, and I sat next to a guy with a cap with like maybe a trucking company on it, and I immediately had all these thoughts about who this guy was. White guy, kind of down homey, just got back from hunting in Montana. And because I'm an activist, I was like, pretty quickly, about 10 minutes in, I was like, so who'd you vote for?
Oh my God. I hope I never sit next to you on a plane.
And we had a conversation, and the conversation covered Trump and Hillary. It covered solar power and subsidies by the government. It covered welfare. It covered global warming. And it was a beautiful conversation. We disagreed on many things. But because we were in a state of respect for the other person's, like I said, I organized some of the marches after the election, and I said that with this total humility of, you could be mad at me about that, but I'd be happy to explain why. Because when we can share this is why this means something to me, that's just being human. And people relate to that. Oh. There was another woman I spoke with. I'm on the pro-choice side of the abortion debate, and this woman was anti-choice. And we told our stories. When I was in high school, I had girlfriends who were about to get pregnant, and their parents didn't know that they were having sex, and so I was like, what do we do? And so I found out where the Planned Parenthood was, and I would literally drag these girls into Planned Parenthood to get birth control, because they would get beat up if they got pregnant. And they didn't want to get pregnant, but they were having sex, and they were not going to tell their parents. So to me, Planned Parenthood was like a godsend. And then I talked to this other woman who had voted for Trump, and she said, well, when I was young, my girlfriends were using abortion as birth control. Like they would just go and get abortions. Wow. And I thought, given that, I can see why you would be anti. So there's something about these kinds of conversations that need to open up, but we have to be not as connected to our beliefs in order to hear and connect. And we left that flight, Neil and I. What a sweetheart. I'd spend time at his house with his wife anytime. And we were friends. And he said, we should be having more conversations like this. Because I asked him, well, you don't believe in global warming. I said, have you looked into it? He said, no. But I believe, and I said, oh, well, I think it might be good to look into things. He said, yeah. And he said some things that made sense to me too.
Yeah, it's kind of, I have sort of a different side of that story about how I came into spiritual social activism, which is when I was young, when I was little, we lived in New Haven, Connecticut, and my dad, we lived in an apartment in a building right upstairs from his office because he was a lawyer and, you know, that's where we lived. And I went to a neighborhood school, and it was a downtown neighborhood, so it was an extremely mixed, racially, culturally mixed school. And we all played together, and we went to each other's houses, and we could walk to each other's neighborhoods, and everybody kind of lived, it was like one big, happy family. And so when we moved to Washington, D.C., when I was going into 5th grade, and because my dad was appointed to a job in the government, and so, you know, we went to call on the elementary school where I was going to go to 5th grade, and the teacher said, well, we have a lot of new children in Washington, D.C. because, you know, people move in and out of Washington all the time. So we always ask people to bring pictures from their previous school. You can see what's going to happen here. And show pictures about what their school was like, where they were before, and, you know, share with the children so we kind of know a little bit about the new children. So my last name began with A. My current name was my married name, but my last name was Arpaia when I was a little girl. That's a whole other story, and because it's Italian. But so I showed up with my class pictures and my birthday party pictures, and of course, you know, there were lots of different children there. And they were all my friends, and we were all having a wonderful time together. And I picked up my first birthday party picture, and this is the sound that I heard from the class. And the teacher ran up to the front of the room, and she said, that's okay, now you can sit down. And I said, well, do I have more pictures? No, please, sit down. Well, I didn't realize that I was moving from a free-thinking, everybody's wonderful, we're all friends together world to a racially segregated city. And I didn't even know what that was, to be honest with you. Nobody ever told me. And I was little, relatively, I wasn't very involved in politics when I was in 5th grade. And I was so crushed because, you know, what was going on? And the teacher wouldn't explain it to me. She said, well, there are some things that you better not share. And, you know, so I'm home, you know, and of course my father, thank God, was there when I came home. And I'm just in tears because I said, I tried to show the pictures of my friends and my birthday party, and they didn't want to see them. And what's wrong with people? And these were my friends, and that's what they told us to do, to bring pictures of our friends. What's the problem? And my dad said, honey, the problem is not with you. It's a misunderstanding in society, and I really hoped I would never have to tell you this because I really thought it would change. And he said, but little white children are not supposed to have black friends in this city. And I said, well, I don't want to live here then. Because I'm going to turn my back on my friends? That's not right, you know? It isn't right. So I went through hell in 5th and 6th grade because I couldn't talk about my friends, and I felt like I was you know, really truthfully denying my good friends. And then when I went to junior high school, it was a different area, and it was not a lot of kids from my elementary school went to my junior high school. And guess what? We're starting desegregation in the schools in Washington, D.C., and everybody's completely freaking out, right? Except me, because I'm excited. You know, I'm going to have friends back, you know? And I turned into a social activist in junior high school because I was the one that was saying, no, it's going to be great. You know, and then I was able to bring out my pictures and say, see, it works out. There are places where people are all together and they're having a good time. Look at, this is my birthday party and all my friends together, white friends and black friends and Chinese friends, and it all works out. I promise you, it's going to be great. And people were like, God, she's so crazy, you know? And I remember that it was such a painful period of our history, you know, again, there's not many of us still around that lived through it and can still talk about it, but it was such a painful period of our history because we didn't understand that there was something deeper than skin color and eye color and hair color. And when I was little in this school, I just thought, well, some people have blue eyes and some people have brown eyes and some people have dark skin and some people have light skin and some people have curly hair and some people have long hair and some people have straight hair. And it didn't register with me that that was important. You know, and there were kids I didn't like of every race, and there were kids I loved, and they were my friends, and because we were kids. And when my high school football team was going to play, I'll never forget this because everybody was still segregated. They were talking about integrating the schools the next year. And so we were playing one of the crosstown teams. And so people's parents were saying, well, don't go to that game because it's going to be really dangerous, you know, because those people are going to come. And I'm going like, well, they're their parents. They're cheering for their kids. Why wouldn't they come? You know? So I went to the game, and my dad went with me, and because he was always there. And there weren't very many people to cheer for our team. But there was a whole bunch of people cheering for the other team, which won. And the parents were all happy, and they had a wonderful time. You know, they came to the football game to see their boys play really well, and they played really well, and they won the game. And the parents left, and nothing happened except that there was hardly anybody cheering for our team, and our boys were really pissed. And they're like, what happened to our fans? And that goes to show you how, you know, we get into these ideas of, you know, it's sports, for God's sake. Everybody's parents loves to watch their kids play. But we're missing the mark for so long. And, you know, I pray that I live long enough to see this pass. I really hoped it would be a lot sooner, but, you know, maybe this is the touching point right now. Maybe we're at a time in our culture where there's so much hatred and so much all over the world, you know, Jews and Palestinians, Shia and Sunni, Arabs and, you know, and the rest of the world, you know, Muslims, and it's crazy what's going on. We have all these ideas about other people and how dangerous they are and how scary they are. And they have the same ideas about us. You know, for heaven's sake, people, you know, this is ridiculous. But I see so clearly the innocence of it because of the principles, and it's seeing that innocence that allows us to cross the bridge. That people can't help but think the things that they have forgotten they didn't used to think. There was a time in every child's life before they had any thoughts about anybody. And somehow over the course of growing up, we listen to this stuff and we make it up and we take it to heart, or we don't take it to heart. We take it seriously, we don't take it seriously. But we forget that there was a time when we didn't have those ideas. And we were fine. We just kind of looked at the world and this is nice. Oh, I like that. You know how babies are with shiny objects? You know, they just, wow. And we need to get back to that and see that the common thread of humanity is not the way we look, or the neighborhood we live in, or the religion we practice. The common thread of humanity is that spiritual activism infuses all of us, because that is the nature of the universe. Mind is the spiritual nature, the universal spiritual nature of all things. All things in the universe, we're just specks. And if there were no spiritual activism alive and at work, we wouldn't even be able to make up those ideas. They would mean nothing we would have nothing. And when we can go deep enough to see that we're all operating from the same energy, the energy that infuses us with the desire to form ideas so that we can see life, then we can start to question our own ideas, and we can listen to other people's ideas and see that we're all innocent. We just made it up and it looks so real.
I did see one article about young people, at least in the States, have it much more together than the rest of us.
My grandson does. He's 18 and he's totally got it together. You know, he's like, what's wrong with everybody?
Yeah. That was very hopeful that they don't see things the way that older older people do, and that's really hopeful.
Yeah.
So let's go to you all, and it could be questions, it could also be contributions and your insights. We would love to hear, and also if there's anything that you are wanting to get from this track as we go forward, we'd love to hear that too.
Yes.
I was encouraged to come, I'm so grateful I did, from Virgil Wood, who's a Baptist minister in the Houston area who's been a fan of the principles for many years.
Yes.
And he was a colleague of Martin Luther King Jr. for the last 10 years of Dr. King's life. And just 5 months from now, in April 2018, will be the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's death. So anyway, Virgil is launching a movement called Free the Dream to revitalize those principles. And one of the reasons I'm wanting this track is to get some practical ideas to harness people's energy to work toward that movement and that critical need we all have.
Right.
It's Free the Dream is a movement that he's launching to revitalize the things that Dr. King stood for, unity and equality and economic growth for all people.
And the beloved community.
The beloved community,
And
exactly.
I think the beloved community is the most beautiful statement that Martin Luther King used to talk about, because that really, it's all love. It starts there.
Yes.
I understand we have virtual participants too, so I don't know if they can ask questions or where are they. But if they want to chime in, they're welcome too. There's a way.
Okay, but now it's your turn.
Yes, now it's your turn.
Hello. So I don't have a question, but like I have a comment. Personally, relating to the stories you were saying about like the racial profiling or whatever we want to call it, I think this all comes from our disability to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
And this disability comes from many other things that even if we learn, teach, learn, or like engage in the three principles or many other understandings that like teach us about how to engage in life, there are some moments that where our pride or our community, our own self, our families, force us to deal with things, like force us to behave or act or say things that we don't actually want to do, or to disagree with other things that might have happened. Personally, I'm a Palestinian who went to a high school in Israel. So this act of me going to study in Israel was completely a complete, utter disagreement with all my other beliefs that I have held for like 17 years of age, which completely disagree with all the 6 million Palestinians who live in the West Bank or Gaza or other places around the world. So if it only takes 1 minute of belief or like 1 minute of thought to actually make a change.
That's a beautiful point. How quickly people, an insight is a moment in time. That's beautiful. I just saw an article about how Israeli and Palestinian women have been on a long march together for peace. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was beautiful.
I went to it last year.
Did you? Oh, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. I really hope for that.
I really love hearing people's stories, and I've just been so moved this morning. I feel like I learned so much from stories.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just had I had a couple memories of some things that had occurred to me around this, and I had one that sort of makes me laugh because, Amy, you talk about what sounded like a really graceful conversation, and I just flashed on one of mine that was so not graceful, it was hysterical, but was really cool. So I was in this, it was an alternative medical treatment. I had to hold on to these 2 rods for like, it's like an hour or an hour and a half, and I would go to this guy every week and I would hold on to these and get this treatment. And he would talk to me, and he was very, like, obviously from the beginning, like, just grew up with a whole different set of beliefs than I did. And but he lived on this farm and he had these chickens, and he would talk about how just his chickens were so beautiful. He just loved his chickens so much, and their eggs were perfect. He knew that the reason the eggs were so amazing, like the best eggs you ever had, was because there was so much love, and he loved these chickens, and he would just cuddle them and kiss them. And I'd never really looked at chickens before really that much. I mean, I love animals. I like the furry ones that kind of,
Yeah.
But so anyway, I'm in this house, and it was at the time of the election, and women were accusing Trump of things that they said, sexual harassment, and he went off. And he's like, well, first of all, he was like, I don't believe in any of these politicians. He didn't like any of them. But he went off about sexual harassment and how women make things up. And that was very personal to me. I came from a background of some trauma. And I was like holding onto these rods, like, I know I'm here to get healed, but I got to get out of here, And I was having this fight inside, like, do I drop the rods and run, or what do I do? Anyway, I took about as much as I could take, and I said, you gotta, I'm here to heal, can you just not talk about this anymore? Because I was disagreeing with him. And then I would get into it, and then, so at a certain point, I was like, I just gotta go. Put the rods down. And I got up, and then I turned around, and I realized I still loved this guy. I really liked him. He's the guy who kisses chickens, And I wasn't afraid of him. And I realized in this moment, I'm afraid of what I'm thinking about what he's saying, but I actually really like him, and I'm not afraid of him. And what was really cool was I'd been saying for a while, I really want to be able to have conversations with people who feel differently than me, but I get scared.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, thank you. Someone gave me this. I need to stay for my treatment. The guy kisses chickens. This is a safe place to get scared and see it. You know what I mean? It was a gift.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just turned to him in that moment, and I sat back down and I said, you know what? I am really uncomfortable with things that I'm hearing, but I still really, really like you so much. I'm fine. And, just sat down, and we decided not to talk about it anymore so I could get my treatment. But, it just wasn't graceful at all, but it was illuminating for me, and I saw that it would be okay to be really awkward with the agreeing to disagree, and it's okay that I got frightened when I heard other opinions that upset me, Yeah. And there was still a moment where I could kind of see what was going on.
Yeah.
So.
It's a beautiful story.
That totally reminded me of how a friend of mine recently commented on Facebook. She's an incredible activist. I wanted her actually to come to this. She lives in the area, but there's another event today related to the category of activism she's particularly passionate about, so she's there. But she was saying that something that really related to what you just said, Sharon, which is that she thinks it's so important that if people who are really strongly pro-choice aren't willing to acknowledge the validity of some of the points of the people who they disagree with in the anti-choice camp, that when are we ever going to get together? Mm-hmm. That whole piece of, you do have something to offer. And when I was listening to what you were saying, I was thinking, well, it is true. Some women do make up stories about sexual harassment, but we don't necessarily want to hear but wait, what if it is true? Da, da, da. And so then we go to this extreme. We have this potential to just run with it when we don't see what it really is, and want to sort of fight for the extremity instead of looking at, that probably does happen sometimes. And then sometimes that's not what's happening. Sometimes it really is the truth, And so that was really cool in the story, that it's so, I've been there a million times where I so am attached to what I think, and it looks so important to me, and I'm forgetting that that's all made up. And so I'm unwilling to just even see where we can agree. And it's just cool to, that's why I'm here. Because I know that there's something, I want to be better at being part of a positive change in the world. And I know that I'm not a very good listener because I really feel strongly about my beliefs. And so I know there's something in the listening and seeing the place where we agree, and I'm here because I want to look more at that.
I notice in myself that when I'm having a discussion with someone and it becomes an argument, there's a feeling in me.
Yeah.
And that's what Sharon was pointing out. There's a feeling of fear, and maybe anger would come out of that fear. You know, global warming. Honestly, I don't know that I've looked into global warming recently very much. So I maybe don't know exactly what's going on either. But I can get very upset about it because of my children, and so it's very important. And I had another conversation with a person actually at the, down in Santa Ynez after hours, where I got very upset. I was almost in tears. And so it's that upset that tells us that we're in our fear. And if we can see that, we can reconnect. And actually, I was able to let go of my emotions and reconnect with the person and just say, look, this is just how I see it. And we were able to connect again. And that to me just feels somehow important, that we can connect and have human relationships and have conversations. I mean, I think people want that for Congress, Democrats and Republicans. Could they connect and have some productive conversations? That's a question of the century.
A part of me says until the voters can do it, they're not going to want to do it. There's no incentive to a politician to go to do something that the voters would find unpleasant. So I think it's on us. It's on us as citizens of the world to behave in the world and to share in the world and to love people across the world with our whole hearts and souls, and to bring peace among each other, because then we will elect people who support us in that endeavor. But right now, why are all these politicians at each other's throats? Because they won't get reelected if they're not. Because we're the ones going to the voting booth. And I think we forget that sometimes, and we're waiting for them to change, and they're waiting for us to change, because they are us, as Pogo said, So we are so deeply connected as human beings, way below any of the layers of thinking that separate us, because deep down inside, the origin of our life is love, and when we rediscover that, it's like you having that moment. I thought it was a beautiful story, because I think all of us have been in situations like that where we get so angry with somebody and we think, I've just got to get out of here. This is terrible. I'm not going to talk to us. And then suddenly we look at the person and we remember a different context. And we go, wait. Now the guy's human, I love it. He kisses chickens. I don't know if that would do it for me, but I'm glad it did for you. So when we look at, again, activism, the origin of activism is love of our life on this earth together. We're all trying to make it better. And sometimes we have a funny way of going about it, because we get caught up in our fears and our anxieties and our troubles. And, one of my very best friends refused to talk, and this is a person I've known since I was 24 years old. We've been friends for all that time. It's a long time. And he's a lawyer, and he and his wife are very good friends of mine, and he refused to talk to me during the election season because we didn't agree politically. And when the idea of women's the issues came up, then I remember I was at a party and he and his wife were there, so he had no choice but to pass a few words, And he said, yeah, well, this reminds me when you were a big supporter of the ERA, and that was the Equal Rights Amendment in Florida. It didn't go anywhere, but I was a big supporter. And he said, you women are always pushing, and men don't get their due. And so I was like, I'm glad you're not talking to me. This is good right now.
Wait, and yet I can see the truth in what he's saying.
I do from his perspective.
Yes.
I saw it. But, at that moment in time, I thought that
just
we're at a
ask
party.
my husband.
But, it's so funny because I thought, I wonder how many people, because this is what I did after that, not with him because it was just too tender that he brought up the ERA. That still hurts. But, it was, I had a conversation with another friend of mine, a man that I've known for a long time, and I said, do guys, when guys are talking to other guys, do they feel like women don't understand them? And he said, hell yes. He said, we have no clue what you guys are doing, but whatever it is, it involves shopping and all this girly stuff that we don't do. But I don't understand why you think the way you think. You can do whatever you want. And I said, well, we don't understand you either. Why don't we ever just talk about it? I said, why don't we have a group of women and men together and talk about it? He said, oh, that wouldn't work out because guys don't like to talk about their feelings. And, so he wouldn't go there. But so I said, well, just you and me. Do you think women are out to get you? And he said, you know what, I think women are scared of men. And I think men are scared of women. And I'm going like, well, there's a human race, and somehow we all got over it, because it's been going on for a long time. And he said, yeah, but I still think deep down that's the problem, is that we keep seeing the differences and we've never gotten to the humanity, and that is the truth. That is the truth. Whenever we're scared or even think we're scared or insecure around another person, it's because we didn't get down below the surface appearance of the person or the gender or the color or the religion or the cultural beliefs to the fact that all we're doing is thinking and making it up and seeing it as real. We're all doing the same thing, that's it. And we're connected at that level beyond beliefs. So, but those conversations, I think it's good those conversations are coming up. I wish they were a little bit nicer, but at least people are willing to talk now,
Well, I love what you said about we have to change.
Yeah.
One of the things that I saw one of the things I saw that came about for me because of the election was that we get the democracy we deserve. And so many people have just said, oh, they're just all corrupt, and I'm not voting, and I don't care. And I thought, well, if that's what we're going to do, then we're not going to have a democracy. Because we're saying, we don't care about our democracy. There are ways to influence our politicians. There are ways for us to participate. And I'm not saying that's even what everyone in this room should be doing, because that's up to your wisdom. Maybe it's time to be active that way. Maybe it's time to do self-care. Maybe, that's something you look into your heart to find. And we'll be talking about self-care the last session. But the world just reflects who we are. The consumerism, and when I watch commercials, I'm like, wow, it's amazing what they're selling with sex, that if you buy these products or have this car, you'll be sexy and all kinds of things. Now we can complain about that, but the only reason that works is because of us. Because we think that's where our happiness is. That's where our fulfillment is. It's in the money. It's in the car. It's in the sex. It's in the power. And if we don't question that, the world will continue as it is. We're the ones. So that's why I say this is it. This is ground zero. If we can't have harmonious relationships with our friends and family, then how can we expect, the Israelis and the Palestinians or blacks and whites to get along. We need to look inside, because the same thinking about otherness and meanness and defending our position is happening just in a larger scale outside of us. So our diving deep into what makes us tick, what do we get upset about, when are we ready to kill somebody, or at least, sock them, or argue with them, or yell at them. If we can look at that, and that's what the principles facilitate, is, wait a second, is it true? Is my thought even true about what to have for dinner? Or whatever it is. Or do I have a compulsion that I want the power, I want the recognition? I still want. So that's really, to me, that's the message of the principles, is it starts right here.
Yes. John, yeah.
I want to be quick, but I did remember another piece to the story that I hadn't been thinking of, and Jen reminded me of it. And it points to something that I think is useful at the moment, which is I was remembering the clunkiness of it, because I kind of got a kick out of being clunky sometimes. But he said to me, and I think this was what was helpful, he said, well, I was accused of that, And I also had a close friend who I stood by for years who also had been accused, and untruthfully. But what happened was, in that moment, that just came to me, like, wait, I'm not scared of this man, I'm safe with this man, and I like this man. In that moment, not by my doing, not by I have to be the person, but by grace of whatever. That came to me and made it perfectly easy and comfortable for me to we actually did keep talking. I misremembered that. We didn't stop talking. And that's the piece where it's like, I feel like there's mind, there is me being clunky human, and then there's something coming in that gives me a leg up and makes the conversation manageable, not because I'm trying and really pushing it, but because there's support built in to have that when I see my thinking. When I saw when I saw my fear, there was space.
Yeah, I work a lot with veterans with PTSD, and I've worked with veterans not only here, but with Israeli veterans. And the one thing that I have discovered is that if everyone in the world really saw that it's all thought, it's all illusion, it's all, as Mahima said, the trick of our minds, we wouldn't be sending old white men, and old other men would not be sending young men off to kill. It wouldn't make sense. And, the Israeli veterans that I worked with, they were so sad about everything that they had done, because they didn't really want to. Everybody has to be in the army, because, like we used to have in Vietnam, everybody had to do it. But, they were like, there were children in those buildings. That was the killer part. For most of the veterans, the things that really affected them was the fact that there were children watching. Children saw this, children suffered, children lost their parents, children lost their lives, and that they didn't ask for this. And how can we do that? How can we do this? How could I have been a part of that? And that eats away at people's hearts and souls. There's a piece we have to forgive. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. And I honestly believe that some of these suffering veterans could become incredible peace activists if they were able to ground it in the logic of the principles. They would say, look, I've been there, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't worth it. And there's a generation suffering because of it. I think about all the refugee children in the world. This is what I think about most when I think about activism from my part at this point for whatever years I have left. I think about the refugee children in the world who have lost home, the opportunity to play outside, pets, going to school. These people are wandering, unwanted, shoved into terrible living conditions. Everybody's sort of hoping they'll just go away. What do the children make of that? The little innocent children, what do they make of that? And what will they make of it when they grow up? Because they're not having the experience of love. You know, they're probably having it from their own families, what's left of them, but they're not having the experience that most children in the world have of a community. You know, even people who live in so-called bad communities still have a community, you know. And there are people they love who love them, and they have a place to call where I am. And the inhumanity that we do to each other in the name of some idea starts to look very foolish in light of the understanding of the principles and the fact that we're just making it up. Somebody made that up and took it so seriously. But when you can question, you can ask yourself, is it real or is it Memorex? Where is this coming from? When you have the humility to ask that question, then you're free from marriage to any ideology or belief. You can believe it if you want to, you don't have to. But if you're asked to do something that's against nature, against love, against the survival of humanity, against peace, against a decent and friendly life for children. It's just really what they want, just friendly life. Something in you would say, no, I don't think so. And I had a Marine in one of my groups, my veterans groups, who said, I hate to tell you this, lady, but if everybody saw it, there wouldn't be any more Marines. Nobody would join, because we're trained to kill. And he said, now when I'm looking back on it, I'm thinking like, I hope I never have to do that again. And isn't that something?
We had one more at almost the very end here. We have one more.
Yeah, it's just turning noontime.
Okay, I'll be real brief. I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but I'm so excited. Here's a vision that I have of a community center that I'm trying to establish as a prototype that could be done in other places. But anyway, it's a multi-generational, cross-cultural, interfaith, creative arts center.
Yes.
Where people in various walks of life can interact with each other through a wide variety of art forms that are native to a given community, whether it's quilting or painting or even the art of camping or whatever. So a friendly forum where people can experiment with different interests and get to know people even if you can't speak the same language, as a place where also the principles can be taught.
That's beautiful. There is a wonderful senior communal housing I heard of where, it was in Reader's Digest, someone set up a center where senior citizens lived with foster kids and guardians, and they all lived together. And it was a way for seniors to not be so isolated and for foster kids to have mentors and people around them who cared about them and loved them. And I thought, and that's what's going to be so cool about the next session. Will be looking at what people are doing. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the activism part, is what do we feel pulled to do, called to do? And that's what's going to, we have these ideas that are fantastic ideas. And that's the hope. They're happening everywhere. I wish we heard more about them, because then we'd be inspired rather than depressed by the news,
We have one more.
Yes, I'm sorry, Amy. This will be quick. I'm sorry, what's your name? Sharon. She made me think of this, sort of this self-exercise, self-healing, self-help exercise that my mentor had me do quite a few years ago. He wrote down certain ages, like 5, 15, 19, 25, 30, and he said, write what you remember, about that age. And what is really like important what you remember, because you remember it for a reason, whether it's some type of fear or whatever it may be, some egotistical thing. And I realized like sort of where I was making decisions from, where I was living from, arguments that I had in my relationships, sort of like, wow. And just to have that little bit of consciousness and being aware of it and being able to sort of respond more appropriately than just reacting. So that might be something that we all can do to kind of better ourselves and the implications we put out into the world. So I wanted to share that real quick. You made me think of it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, I guess our time is kind of up.
Our time is up. I think, do we go to lunch now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going.